There is a hill. It appears 3 times in the book of Genesis, though most people only notice it once. By the time we reach it for the 3rd time, and we will reach it, everything you thought you knew about this book will look different. Hold that thought. Because before the hill, there is a garden. And before the garden, there is nothing. Not darkness exactly. Not emptiness in the way you and I understand emptiness. The Hebrew word used in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 is tohu wa bohu, formless and void, a kind of unformed potential, like a canvas that has not yet decided what it wants to be. And then God speaks, and the canvas answers. In 6 days, by the accounting of Genesis chapter 1, everything you have ever seen or touched or tasted comes into existence. Light, water, land, grass, stars, birds, fish. And finally, on the 6th day, a creature unlike anything else, made not from a divine command, shouted into the void, but formed by hands, shaped from the ground, breathed into. The Hebrew word for this creature is Adam, and the Hebrew word for the ground he is shaped from is Adamah. Adam, Adamah. The man and the soil share the same root word. He is, in the most literal sense, a creature of the earth, alive only because God leaned down and breathed into the dust. You need to feel the weight of that. This is not mythology. The ancient world had plenty of creation myths. The Babylonians had the Enuma Elish, in which humanity is made from the blood of a defeated god, created to be slaves so the divine beings could rest. But Genesis is doing something entirely different. In Genesis, the first human is not a slave. He is a steward. He is given a garden and told to tend it. He is given language and told to name things. He is given another human, bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh, and told that it is not good for him to be alone. In the beginning, the word God keeps using about everything he makes is this: good. And then, on the 6th day, looking at everything together, very good. That is the baseline. That is what Genesis wants you to feel before anything breaks. The world as it was designed to be. 2 humans in a garden, walking with God in the cool of the evening, unashamed, unhurried, unafraid. And then, there is a tree. You know what happens at the tree. Everybody knows what happens at the tree. But here is what most people miss. The serpent does not tempt Eve with pleasure. He tempts her with a question. Did God really say? 4 words. The oldest question in human history. Not, wouldn't this taste good? But, are you sure you can trust what God told you? The attack is not on the appetite. It is on the promise. She eats. He eats. And the world that was very good fractures along a line that is never fully healed. This is not a story about how the world began. This is not a story about a talking snake. This is not a story about fruit. This is a story about a promise, the oldest promise ever made, and whether God kept it. Because here is what happens next, and this is the part that changes everything. God comes looking for them. He does not come with fire. He does not come with a verdict already written. He comes with a question, the same kind of question the serpent asked, but with entirely different intent. Where are you? He knows where they are. He made them. He is asking because he wants them to say it. He wants them to name what happened. They cannot quite do it. Adam blames Eve. Eve blames the serpent. And God, patient, grieved, just, speaks judgment over each of them in turn. the serpent, the woman, the man. And then, in the middle of that judgment speech, aimed directly at the serpent, God says something that will echo for the next 4,000 years of human history. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Theologians have a Latin name for this verse. They call it the Protoevangelium, the first gospel. The first announcement of a coming one who would undo what the serpent had done. Spoken in a garden, spoken to a snake, spoken before Adam and Eve had taken a single step outside the only home they had ever known. The first promise, already made, already in motion. And then God does something that nobody asked him to do. Before they leave, before the cherubim take their posts at the gate, before the flaming sword begins its rotation, God makes them clothes. Not from leaves, the way they had tried, from animal skin, which means something died. Something innocent, in a garden that had never known death, was killed so that two people who had just broken the one rule they were given could be covered. You can spend a lifetime thinking about that. People have. The garden closes behind them, but the promise is already walking ahead. Here is something that gets lost in the translation. After God speaks judgment in the garden, after the cursing of the ground, after the pain in childbirth, after the sweat and the thorns and the sentence of death, Eve receives a new name. Not before the fall, after. Adam looks at his wife, this woman who ate the fruit alongside him, this woman the serpent used as the entry point for everything that just went wrong, and he calls her Eve. The Hebrew is Chava. It means mother of all living. He names her for life, in the very moment that death has just entered the world. That is either the most tone-deaf thing a husband has ever done, or it is the earliest act of faith recorded in human history. He heard the promise. He believed it. He named his wife for the life that was coming, even as they walked away from the only life they had ever known. You will need that image later. Hold it. The chapters that follow Genesis 3 move fast and they move dark. Cain kills Abel. The first murder happens in the first family, in the first generation after the fall. Augustine, writing in the 5th century in his City of God, saw in this something architectural. Cain builds a city. Abel offers a sacrifice. Two impulses, building your own kingdom or giving back to God, that have been running in parallel through every civilization since. The fall did not just break two people. It installed a fracture in the operating system of human culture. By the time you reach Genesis 6, something has gone so deeply wrong that God uses a word that does not appear often in Scripture. He is grieved. The Hebrew is yit atzep. It carries the sense of pain, of deep inner anguish. The God who made everything and called it very good looks at what humanity has done with his creation, and it causes him pain. That is not a small thing. And then there is Noah. Noah is introduced in Genesis 6 with a phrase that has launched 1,000 arguments. He was righteous in his generation. Josephus, the 1st century Jewish historian, fills in what Genesis leaves spare. In his Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus describes Noah as a man who spent years, decades by his accounting, calling on his neighbors to turn back. He preached. He warned. He built a boat in a desert while people watched and laughed and continued as they were. Nobody listened. The flood came. And here is the word that matters. the word that appears for the first time in Genesis 6, verse 18. A word that will echo through the rest of the Bible and into the New Testament and into the theology of every church that has ever met on a Sunday morning. Berith. Covenant. Not a contract. Not an agreement between equals where both parties negotiate terms and shake hands and walk away with copies for their files. A berith in the ancient Near East was a blood-ratified bond. When two parties made a berith, they would cut animals in half, lay the pieces on the ground, and walk between them together, a living oath that said, "If I break this, let what happened to these animals happen to me." It was binding in the most visceral sense of the word. God says to Noah, "I will establish my berith with you." One man, one family, 8 people on a planet that has just been washed clean. The stakes at this point are personal, smaller, you might think, than the original garden promise. But the pattern is already forming. Every time the world breaks further, God does not step back. He steps closer. He narrows the promise to a person and then expands it again. The waters recede. Noah steps out onto wet ground, and the first thing God does is establish that promise formally with a sign. A bow set in the clouds. Not a metaphor, not decoration, a signature. In the ancient world, when a warrior hung up his bow after a battle, it meant the fighting was over. God hangs his bow in the sky and points it away from the earth, toward himself. If judgment falls again, it falls on me first. That is the rainbow. That is what it means. And now you will never see one the same way again. Stay with me, because the story is about to do something extraordinary. The flood is over. The covenant with Noah is established. And you might expect the story to calm down from here. The worst has passed. Humanity has a second chance. Surely now things will improve. They do not improve. By Genesis 11, humanity has gathered in a plain called Shinar and decided to build a tower to the heavens. Not to reach God exactly. The text is more specific than that. They say, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, so that we may make a name for ourselves." The old fracture reasserts itself. Cain's impulse, build your own kingdom, make your own name, runs straight from the garden to the plain of Shinar without a break. God scatters them. Their languages divide. The nations form. And then Genesis 12 opens with a sentence that is, quietly, one of the most important sentences in the Bible. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." No introduction, no explanation of why Abram, no description of what Abram has done to deserve this, or what he believes, or what country he comes from. We get those details later, and they are striking. Abram is from Ur of the Chaldeans, a city in what is now southern Iraq, a civilization that worshipped the moon god Nana. He is 75 years old. He has no children. His wife, Sarai, whose name God has not yet changed, is a woman that everyone around her knows is barren. God looks at this man, old, childless, from a city of moon worshippers, and says, "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." All peoples on earth. The promise that began in a garden with 2 people has now expanded to include every nation, every tribe, every language group on the planet. Through one elderly man with no children, standing in a city that does not know the God who is speaking to him. Abram goes. That is the underrated miracle of Genesis 12. He simply goes. The text does not record a long night of wrestling, or a period of discernment, or a committee meeting with Sarai. God speaks. Abram packs. And everything that comes after, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, David, the prophets, the manger in Bethlehem, everything hangs on that single act of movement by a 75-year-old man who believed a promise he had no rational reason to believe. And this is where it gets remarkable. Because the promise is made in Genesis 12, but it is not sealed there. The sealing, the moment when God puts His own life on the line for this covenant, comes 3 chapters later, in the dark, in one of the strangest scenes in all of Scripture. We are not done with Abraham yet. Before we go further, I want you to notice something. We are 3 stories in. Adam and Eve in the garden, Noah on the water, Abram leaving Ur. And every single time, the pattern is the same. Humans break something. God makes a promise. Not a threat, not a withdrawal, a promise. And each promise is bigger than the one before it. The garden promise was personal, a coming one who would crush the serpent's head. The Noah promise was familial, one household preserved, a covenant signed with a rainbow. The Abraham promise is global, all peoples on earth blessed through one man. The fractures get wider, the promises get larger. If you have never studied Genesis like this before, if you have always seen it as a collection of ancient stories that may or may not have anything to do with your life right now, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel, because this is what we do here every week. We go deep. We go slow. We find the thing underneath the thing. Hit subscribe and come back every time we post. Now, we were not done with Abraham. Genesis 15 opens at night. Abram is outside. The stars are out. Not the washed-out stars you see from a city, but the kind of stars you only see in a desert. So many and so dense, they look less like points of light and more like a field of fire suspended overhead. And God says, "Count them." Abram cannot count them. Nobody can count them. God says, "That is how many descendants you will have." And here is the sentence that follows. 4 words in English, 3 in Hebrew, that Martin Luther said he could spend his whole life meditating on and not reach the bottom of. Abram believed God. That is all. No negotiation. No request for a sign. No theological argument. A man who is now somewhere past 80 years old, still childless, looks up at stars he cannot count and believes that somehow, from his body and the body of his barren wife, a nation will come. And God credited it to him as righteousness. But then Abram asks a question, not a faithless question, a human one. How will I know that I will gain possession of it? And God answers with a ritual so strange, so ancient, so viscerally physical, that most modern readers skip past it without understanding what they are looking at. God tells Abram to bring a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a young pigeon. Abram brings them, cuts them in half, all except the birds, and lays the pieces on the ground in 2 rows with a path between them. You need to understand what this is. In the ancient Near East, this ritual had a name. It was called cutting a covenant. In Hebrew, karet berith, literally, to cut a covenant. Both parties to the agreement would walk between the animal pieces together, and the walk was an oath. If I break what I have promised here, let what happened to these animals happen to me. It was the most binding agreement a human being could make. Your life on the line, your blood in the contract. Abram lays out the pieces and waits. And waits. The sun goes down. Darkness falls, and Abram falls into a deep sleep. The same word used in Genesis 2 when God caused Adam to sleep before taking his rib. A divine sleep, not ordinary rest. And in that sleep, God speaks. Here's the part nobody tells you. When the covenant walk happens, when someone finally moves between those animal pieces in the dark, it is not Abram. Abram is asleep. God passes through alone. A smoking firepot and a blazing torch moving between the pieces, the only parties present being the divine presence and the darkness. Abram does not walk. Abram cannot walk. Abram is unconscious on the ground while God makes a promise so absolute, so unconditional, that no human failure can break it, because no human signed it. Think about what that means. In every other berith in the ancient world, both parties were responsible. If you broke the covenant, consequences followed. But God walked this one alone, which means the promise to Abraham, the promise of land, of descendants, of blessing for all nations, does not depend on Abraham keeping his end. It depends entirely on God keeping his. The promise is not a contract. It is a gift. And the only way it fails is if God himself fails. He has not failed yet. Pay attention to this. Because 3 chapters later, in Genesis 18, the promise is about to be tested in the most human way possible. 3 visitors arrive at Abraham's tent, and Abraham, who has been walking with God long enough to recognize something extraordinary, runs to meet them and bows low and says, "Please do not pass by. Let me bring you water. Let me bring you bread. Stay a while." They stay. And one of them, the one whose words carry a different weight than the others, says, "I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Sarah is inside the tent. She is 90 years old, and she laughs. Not a joyful laugh. A laugh that comes from somewhere deep in the chest, the kind of laugh that is halfway to a sob. The laugh of someone who has been waiting so long for something that they have stopped letting themselves want it, and the wanting has just ambushed them without permission. She laughs behind the tent door where nobody can see her, and God hears it. "Why did Sarah laugh?" he says. Not angrily, with a precision that is almost tender. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Sarah denies it. "I did not laugh." She is afraid now. "You did laugh," he says. And he is right. And she knows he is right.
Take comfort.
And 9 months later, she is holding a baby with dark eyes and soft hands, and she is laughing again. But this time, the laugh is different. This time, it is the laugh of someone who has been given back something they had buried. She names the boy Isaac. In Hebrew, Yitzchak. He laughs. The punchline is in the name. God let her have the last word, and her last word was laughter. Not despair, not apology, laughter. But the story of Abraham is not finished with laughter. It is building toward something that will cost more than anything Abraham has yet been asked to give. Isaac grows. And one day, we are not told how many years later, God speaks to Abraham again. And what he says stops the reader cold every single time, in every language, across every century this book has been read. "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. There is the hill. The first time it appears in this book, most people do not notice it as a hill at all. They are focused on what God is asking Abraham to do: to take this boy, this impossible boy, this child of laughter, who is the only thread connecting every promise God has ever made to any future at all, and sacrifice him on an altar. Abraham rises early the next morning. He does not argue. He does not negotiate. He loads a donkey, takes 2 servants, takes Isaac, and goes. On the 3rd day, Abraham looks up and sees the place from a distance. He tells the servants, "Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go up and worship, and then we will come back." We will come back. He believes the promise. Even now, even here, the writer of Hebrews, centuries later, will explain what Abraham was thinking in that moment. He reasoned that God could even raise the dead. He was not walking up that hill in despair. He was walking up that hill in a faith so severe it looked from the outside indistinguishable from obedience. Isaac carries the wood. They walk together. The text says it twice, those 3 words, walked on together. Once before Isaac asks his question, and once after, as if the writer wants you to feel the weight of that togetherness, the intimacy of a father and a son walking toward something neither of them fully understands. Isaac says, "Father." Abraham says, "Yes, my son." "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac says, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answers without hesitation, "God himself will provide the lamb, my son." And they walked on together. They reach the top. Abraham builds the altar. He arranges the wood. He binds his son, his only son whom he loves, and lays him on the altar on top of the wood. He reaches out his hand. He takes the knife. And then a voice from heaven, sharp, urgent. The text uses a word that implies immediacy, as if the call came at the last possible second. "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he says. "Do not lay your hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looks up, and there, caught in a thicket by its horns, is a ram. Not a lamb, a ram. Isaac had asked about a lamb, and Abraham had said God would provide. And God provides a ram, because the lamb is not ready yet. The lamb is still coming. But for today, on this hill, the ram is enough. Abraham sacrifices the ram, and then he names the place. In Hebrew, Yahweh Yireh, the Lord will provide. And to this day, the saying goes, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. The hill has a name now, Moriah. And this is the 2nd time it has appeared in this story, though we did not see it coming the first time. Hold that thought. Because there is a 3rd appearance, and it is the one that changes everything. But first, we need to talk about a pit. There is a boy at the bottom of a hole. He is 17 years old. His name is Joseph. And the men standing at the rim of that hole, looking down at him, are his brothers. 10 of them, his own blood. The hole is dry. The text is careful to tell you that, as if it matters, as if the writer wants you to feel the specific texture of the abandonment. Not drowning, just sitting in the dark at the bottom of a pit that his brothers dug and dropped him into because they could not stand to look at him anymore. They sit down to eat a meal while he is in the hole, while he is calling up to them. And we know this because years later, In a moment of confrontation, one of the brothers will say, "We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us. They heard him. They ate their bread. And then they sold him." 20 pieces of silver to a group of Midianite traders heading toward Egypt. The brothers take Joseph's coat, the famous coat, the one his father Jacob had given him as a mark of favor, and dip it in goat's blood and bring it home to their father. Jacob tears his clothes. He refuses to be comforted. He says, "I will go down to my son in mourning." Joseph is not dead, but nobody in his family knows that. Now watch what happens next. Joseph arrives in Egypt in chains and is sold to a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. And in one of the quietest sentences in this entire book, Genesis 39 says, "The Lord was with Joseph." Not, Joseph was faithful and therefore things went well. Not, Joseph kept the covenant and was rewarded. The Lord was with Joseph. In Egypt, in a foreign country, in a house where nobody speaks his language or worships his God. In a life he did not choose and cannot escape. The same God who walked through the animal pieces alone in Genesis 15, the God who made a promise that did not depend on human performance, is present in an Egyptian household with a 17-year-old boy who has been betrayed by everyone he loves. He rises in Potiphar's house, and then Potiphar's wife lies about him, and he is thrown into prison. The Lord was with Joseph. He rises in the prison, earns the trust of the warden, interprets dreams for 2 of Pharaoh's officials who are imprisoned alongside him, asks the cupbearer to remember him when he gets out. The cupbearer gets out. He forgets Joseph for 2 full years. The Lord was with Joseph. And then Pharaoh has a dream that nobody in Egypt can interpret.
Take courage.
7 fat cows devoured by 7 thin cows, 7 healthy heads of grain swallowed by 7 scorched ones. And the cupbearer finally remembers the young Hebrew man in the prison who told him what his own dream meant. Joseph is brought out of the prison. He shaves, changes his clothes. The detail matters. He is trying to look like someone Pharaoh should listen to, not like someone who has been in a pit. And he stands before the most powerful man in the known world. He is 30 years old. 13 years between the pit and the palace. 13 years in which everything that could go wrong for a person went wrong. Slavery, false accusation, prison, forgotten. And yet, and this is the thing that should stop you cold. Not once in those 13 years does the text record Joseph cursing God. Not once does he abandon the character that Genesis keeps attributing to him. He just keeps being faithful in whatever room he finds himself in, even when the room is a prison cell in a foreign country, even when the person who promised to remember him forgot him for 2 years. Here is what most people miss about Joseph. He is not a story about positive thinking. He is not a story about resilience, in the modern motivational sense of that word. He is a story about what happens when the promises of God operate on a timeline longer than a human life can easily hold. Joseph does not see the plan. He lives inside the plan without being able to see it, which is a completely different thing and considerably harder. Pharaoh tells him his dream. Joseph interprets it. 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. And Egypt needs a man to oversee the storage and distribution of grain before the famine hits. Pharaoh looks at the 30-year-old former prisoner standing in front of him and says, "There is no one as discerning and wise as you." You will be in charge of my palace. Only I will be greater than you." The boy from the pit is now second in command of Egypt. And the famine comes. It does not only hit Egypt, it hits Canaan too, the land where Jacob is, where Joseph's brothers are, where the family that sold him into slavery is now running out of food. And Jacob hears that there is grain in Egypt, and he sends his sons, 10 of them, the same 10 who stood at the rim of that pit 22 years ago, to go and buy food from the Egyptian official in charge of the grain supply. They bow down to him with their faces to the ground. The dreams Joseph had as a 17-year-old, the dreams his brothers mocked and hated him for, are being fulfilled at this exact moment, and his brothers do not even know who they are bowing to. Joseph recognizes them immediately. He does not reveal himself, not yet. He tests them. He watches them. He listens to them talk among themselves, unaware that the Egyptian official in front of them speaks their language. Because why would an Egyptian official speak Hebrew? And he hears them say, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us, and we would not listen." And Joseph turns away from them and weeps. He is not angry. He is grieved. Not for himself, but for them. For the 22 years they have carried this. For the guilt that has lived in them since the day they came home with a blood-soaked coat and watched their father collapse. He reveals himself in one of the most dramatic scenes in the Bible, clears the room of all his Egyptian attendants, and in the silence, with only his brothers present, says in Hebrew, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" His brothers cannot answer him. They are terrified. He says, "Come close to me." And then, this is the grace that breaks the story open. He says, "Do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. Not, you sold me. Not, I have been suffering for 22 years because of what you did. Not, justice will now be served. God sent me ahead of you." He has reframed the entire story. The pit, the slavery, the false accusation, the prison, the forgotten years, all of it, in Joseph's telling, was not accident or cruelty or abandonment. It was movement. It was God working on a timeline his brothers could not see, through suffering they caused, toward a destination none of them could have planned. And years later, when Jacob dies and the brothers are afraid that Joseph has only been waiting for that moment to take his revenge, Joseph says the sentence that is the thesis of the entire book of Genesis. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." This is not a story about a boy who survived. This is not a story about forgiveness, though there is forgiveness here. This is not a story about the power of a positive attitude in the face of adversity. This is a story about a God who writes straight with crooked lines, who takes the worst thing humans can do to each other, betrayal, abandonment, violence, and folds it into a purpose so large that the humans doing the betrayance are, without knowing it, participating in their own rescue.
Do not punish us for the grain.
And now, the hill. The third time. There is a parent who watches a child walk out the door after making a choice that cannot be unwound. And they do not chase. They do not bar the door. They make sure the child is clothed. That is the word from Genesis 3, clothed. And they watch them go. And the light stays on. God watched Adam and Eve walk out of the garden. He made them clothes first. God watched Joseph go into a pit. And 13 years later, he was standing in a palace, and the pain had been folded into a purpose. And the brothers who put him in the pit were eating bread at his table, and the light had been on the whole time. And somewhere outside this book, outside Genesis, outside the Old Testament, on a hill on the edge of a city called Jerusalem, the third appearance of Moriah arrives. Not in a story about Abraham, not in a story about Isaac. On a Friday morning before the Passover, a man carries wood up a hill. The wood is a cross, and his father watches. And this time there is no ram in the thicket. Because this time, the writer of the book of Hebrews will say it plainly, the Son is the Lamb. The one Abraham said God would provide. The one the Protoevangelium in Genesis 3 promised would come and crush the serpent's head. The one the rainbow pointed to. A God who would rather absorb the judgment himself than let it fall on the people he made. Genesis 3, verse 15. Kept. The hill that appeared first with Abraham, then with Isaac, now crowns the oldest promise in the Bible. Not broken, not deferred, not forgotten, kept. Exactly as spoken. In the garden, before they even left. You intended it for harm. God intended it for good. That sentence was written about Joseph, but it was always bigger than Joseph. It has always been bigger than any single story in this book. It is the logic underneath all of Genesis, the current that runs beneath every betrayal and every promise, and every pit, and every dawn after a long night. The God of Genesis does not abandon. He advances. Every fracture becomes the fault line along which the next promise runs deeper. So here is what Genesis is. It is not a science textbook, though people have spent centuries arguing about it as if it were. It is not a collection of myths borrowed from older cultures, though the parallels with ancient Near Eastern literature are real and worth studying. It is not a book about the distant past that has nothing to say to the present. Genesis is a book about a promise that refused to die. 3 takeaways. And I want you to stay with me through all 3, because the third one is the one that will follow you home. The first is this. Genesis is architecturally designed around a Hebrew word, toledot. Generations, accounts of what came from each person. The word appears 10 times in the book, and each time it appears, it signals a new chapter in the story. Not a disconnected story, but a linked one. What came from Adam? What came from Noah? What came from Abraham? What came from Isaac? What came from Jacob? What came from Joseph? Every generation, no matter how badly it fails, becomes the soil for the next promise. The book is not a flat list of ancient people. It is a spine, and every vertebra connects. The second is this. You are somewhere in this story right now. I do not mean that loosely or metaphorically. I mean it literally. You're either in the garden, in a season of goodness you're perhaps taking for granted, not yet aware of how fragile it is. Or you're outside the garden, carrying the weight of a choice that cannot be undone, wondering if the door is permanently closed. Or you are in the pit, 17 years old or 70, in the dark, calling up to people who are eating bread at the rim and not answering. Or you are in the palace, standing in a room where the suffering finally makes sense, where you can look back at the crooked path and see, for the first time, that it was going somewhere. Wherever you are in this story, the pattern says one thing clearly. God does not leave. He does not withdraw the promise when the person carrying it fails. He narrows it, deepens it, buries it sometimes, in a pit, in a prison, in a tomb, and then he brings it up again. He always brings it up again. And the third. The hill called Moriah appears in one more place outside of Genesis. 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1. Solomon builds the temple, the place where God's presence will dwell, where the sacrifices will be offered, where the people will come to be near God. And the text tells you exactly where he builds it. On Mount Moriah, the same hill, the hill where Abraham said God would provide, the hill where a ram died so Isaac could live, the hill that would one day hold the temple, and then one day hold a cross, and on the cross a man who, according to the Gospel of John, said with his last breath, "It is finished." Not almost finished, not mostly finished, finished. The promise that God spoke into the face of a serpent in a garden, the promise that one would come who would crush what the serpent had done, was finished on the same hill where Abraham had said, "I do not know how, but God will provide the lamb." The lamb was provided. It took 2,000 years, but the promise did not expire. It did not waver. It did not depend on any human being keeping their end of anything, because God had walked that covenant path alone in the dark, and the only way it could fail was if God himself failed. He did not fail. In the beginning, God. And God did not stop there. Now I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want you to answer this in the comments, because I read every single one. Which moment in Genesis hit you differently today? Was it the covenant ceremony in Genesis 15, where God walks alone through the pieces while Abram sleeps? Was it Sarah laughing behind the tent door, and the baby she held 9 months later with the laugh built into his name? Was it Joseph turning away from his brothers in the grain hall of Egypt, weeping because he heard them say they knew what they had done? Tell me, because your answer tells me where you are in the story, and I want to know. Genesis ends with Joseph in a coffin in Egypt. That is the last image of the book, a coffin in the wrong country, waiting. Joseph made his brothers swear an oath, "When God brings you out of Egypt, carry my bones with you." He knew the story was not over. He knew the promise was still in motion. He died believing in a destination he would not live to see. 400 years later, Moses leads the people out of Egypt. And Exodus 13, verse 19 says, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. The promise kept moving, even after the man who believed it was gone, even after the coffin was closed. Even in the in-between, when nothing seemed to be happening and the silence stretched across 4 centuries, the light was on. It is still on. In the beginning, God. And God did not stop there.